Yes, a partial birth abortion, as defined under federal law, is where a physician partially delivers, usually the trunk and legs of the baby, leaving only the head in the birth canal, and the baby is alive, and then takes an act to kill the baby at that point, usually thrusting scissors into the back of the skull in order to kill the baby, and then completes the delivery. So it's a way of killing the baby when most of the baby is already outside of the womb.
And there were actually people who argued against banning that barbaric practice?
Oh yes. I mean, many of the people we've been hearing from today were big advocates for a continuation of partial birth abortions. They have no respect for human life if they consider it to be unborn, or they want to label it as a fetus. And literally anything is all right as far as they seem to be concerned.
Well, let's go to that point, because Professor Smith seems to draw a line, artificial as it may be, between the humanity owed to a viable fetus and the lack of humanity owed to what she considers to be a non-viable fetus. Who gets to draw that line of demarcation between viability and non-viability?
Well, that's a complex question. Number one, it is a medical determination on whether or not a child is viable, but it's a difficult one, and there are many gray areas. For instance, the statistics are after 20 weeks, 1 in 4 can survive. And we would consider that to mean, therefore, that anyone born at that point in time ought to be considered viable. But many times you just simply don't know until later. I haven't heard any people that work at abortion clinics are able to make that fine and complex medical decision.
No, I think Professor Smith, if I heard her correctly, said that she was not a doctor and it should be up to the doctors to make that determination. Although I did note the irony, it was 9 damn lawyers who came up with that plan, not of one of whom was a doctor. And I also noted the irony of Hank Johnson wondering why there weren't more women on our side of the aisle, when they tend to target those who seek office as Republican women. And there wasn't a single woman on the court when Roe versus Wade was decided, but that doesn't seem to trouble him much either. For those watching at home or here, doesn't civil law recognize the viability of even a pre-viable fetus when it comes time for the plaintiff's attorney to get paid?
There are many instances of cases in various states of wrongful death of the unborn, of criminal laws to punish.
Well, we're going to get to criminal law in a second. Let's just stick with civil right now. When it comes time for the trial attorney to get paid, we have a different definition of viability, right?
Well, viability is simply not relevant.
Exactly. You can be 2 weeks pregnant, and you have a cause of action on behalf of that unborn child. And our friends on the other side of the aisle, some of whom were plaintiffs' attorneys, have no trouble being paid for the life of that 2-week-old.
Right. The idea of separating, using viability as a standard is really antiquated, and most courts have gone away from that to just simply the point that if the child is alive.
Well, but it's hard to go away from viability when Professor Smith said there's not any humanity owed a pre-viable, she won't say baby, pre-viable fetus.
Yeah. That's exactly.
Did I misunderstand her? Is there any degree of humanity owed?
Well,
I mean, you've been sitting beside her all morning. Did I miss something? Is there something outside the bounds of decency we really won't allow as long as the fetus is pre-viable?
Well, as I understand her testimony, if a born alive infant is considered to be not viable, then we have a free fire zone. We can do whatever we want. We can kill the life at will, harvest their tissues, whatever the case may be. And of course, the concern about the producing intact infants, which it has been demonstrated in the videos, is of course the possibility that these unborn children are alive. And there's even evidence that one of the intact babies born alive had a beating heart, which is a definition of being alive.
Which is why the videos are relevant to our conversation about partial birth abortion. Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time. I just have two really quick questions for Ms. Smith, which she can answer with a yes or no. Ms. Smith, if we were to double the amount of money available to the providers but give it to someone not named Planned Parenthood, would you be okay with that?
I would have to know who it was going to and whether they were quality.
Anyone not named Planned Parenthood.
Not anyone, no.
Anyone who's qualified to provide services.
If they provide high-quality services to low-income people in the same way that Planned Parenthood does, frankly, yes. I don't have any.
So you're okay with us defunding Planned Parenthood as long as the money goes somewhere where it can do the most amount of good for the same group of people? Yes. You're okay with Congress defunding Planned Parenthood?
Not in the current environment where there is no one able.
And if there were, would you be okay with it?
If there were, yeah, it would be a different world, and yes, then you could fund that organization.
So if we can identify service providers that meet that same quality of care, not named Planned Parenthood, you'll support the Republicans in defunding Planned Parenthood?
I don't know that you and I will agree on who those people are, and I would have to.
Sure. How about we just try? How about when do we do that?
If you're asking me a hypothetical question, there was.
Yeah, I'll double the money as long as it doesn't go to the folks who donate money to Democrats' Planned Parenthood. We'll double the amount of money available as long as it doesn't go to Planned Parenthood. How's that?
As long as it doesn't go to Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood today is the institution that provides the best, highest quality care to women in this country, across this nation, in cities, in low-income areas where these services are unavailable to them.
They're also the target of videos that are barbaric and heinous and subhuman. So as long as we can get that same level of care and do it through an entity not named Planned Parenthood.
As a very small part of their services, and this is why you oppose them. And that is the only reason you oppose them.
You have no idea why. I was voting to defund Planned Parenthood, with all due respect, Professor, before the videos ever showed up.
I wasn't talking about the videos.
Well, I don't think we know each other well enough for you to assign a motive to what I'm doing.
I think vice versa.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, gentlemen. Just to.
Okay, so this is the first thing that I would say is that when they argue morality, you should not argue policy. You will always lose. Morality always beats policy. It's why Republicans lose. Right? When they argue that it's immoral for you not to be nicer to the poor, and you argue, yes, but your policies are ineffective. Okay, immoral beats ineffective in an argument any day. So when it comes to purely moral issues, social issues like abortion, to get more specific, the reality is that abortion is not a complex issue. It's a very simple issue. That's either a life or it isn't. It's that simple. If it's a life, you can't kill it. If it's not a life, you can do whatever you want. It's a kidney, right? So and then it becomes, okay, so how do we define life? And the answer to me is you define life by the same way that you would define life if you found it on Mars, right? If you found a single-celled organism on Mars, it's a life. Right? I know, as somebody who has one baby and another on the way, that what's in there is not a random piece of tissue. At the very least, even if you don't believe it's a life yet, it's certainly a potential human life, and that seems to be more valuable than your convenience. And there's something nasty and cruel and degrading about the idea that you get to decide whether something is a life or not based on whether it's convenient to you or because it's in your body. By the way, this is exactly. It truly is amazing, actually, how history repeats itself. The argument in favor of abortion is exactly the same as the argument in favor of slavery. Exactly the same, right? You're on my land. I get to decide. It's up to me to decide whether you're a person or property. It's up to me, right? What are you going to say? It's on my land. What are you going to do about it? So when you have women who say it's in my womb, I get to decide based on what I feel today. I look into my heart, and I decide whether this is a child or not. Well, it turns out that in human history, there's a long and inglorious chain of people who said, I get to decide whether this person is a person or not. And it never ends with anything but mass death. So if you want to be that person who says, okay, that's not a human, I'm just going to flush it down the toilet because it's personal convenience. You can always tell, by the way, who is losing an argument by who's using the euphemisms. When it comes to abortion, the left uses nothing but euphemisms. Abortion, terminate the pregnancy, pro-choice. They never say, oh, no, what I would really prefer to do is go in there with some steel instruments, cut that baby apart, and suck its brain into a sink. Right? For some odd reason, they don't like talking like that. I can't imagine why. So, I've never been a fan of pussyfooting around this particular issue. I think that it would be well worthwhile for whoever the Republican nominee is. One won't do it, but it would be nice if somebody would go onto a stage with Hillary Clinton and say, your stated position is that this child, then reach into his breast pocket and pull out a picture of a child at 30 weeks and say that this child can be murdered at the whim of the mother. This is your stated position. You believe that this is not a human, right? This is a piece of flesh. It's a piece of random flesh. This makes you a bad person, right? It does. It makes you a bad person. My wife's 30 weeks pregnant right now. That baby's kicking the hell out of her. I promise you, that ain't a random piece of flesh in there. That's my child, and it's her child. And anybody who says differently ought to be caned. It's disgusting. And just to clarify for the Donald Trump voters, that's not literal. People shouldn't actually be caned for their opinions.
Is this on? I'm Mackenzie, and I go to Carpenter High School. And I often get asked questions about abortion all the time. Mm-hmm. And it's really difficult for me to come back with, my answer. And people always ask, well, what if the woman is raped? What do you do? What would you say in that case?
Yeah, so what I always say with regard to rape, for example, is that if a woman is raped, we should find her rapist, we should track him down, and we should kill him, right? Or castrate him. These are my two options. Pick one. Whichever one you please, right? Either one of those is okay. Also, it's bad to kill babies. That's my answer. They're completely unrelated. The two topics are completely unrelated. The source of the pregnancy and whether that's a human life in there are two completely unrelated topics, right? It's a very difficult emotional issue, which is why my personal view of abortion is that when the mother's life is in danger, then abortion is appropriate. That's my exception. Not the health of the mother, the life of the mother. And for me, that includes suicidality, for example. So if a woman is suicidal and she's going to kill herself because she doesn't want to bear this child, then abortion is appropriate. But other than that, these are two separate issues, right? Because rape is wrong, and so is killing babies, it turns out. Two things can both be wrong. They're not equally wrong. In fact, it depends which way you view it. But the fact is that what they want to do is they also, let's be real about this, what the left wants to do is pick the outlier and then use it to justify all the rest of the abortions. Okay? 99% of the abortions in this country have nothing to do with rape. Nothing to do with rape. They have to do with people having irresponsible sex. They have to do with convenience. They have to do with age. They have to do with they don't like whether it's a boy or a girl. So what they like to do is they like to take the one outlier case and the one that tugs at the heartstrings and then say, well, let's just make abortion legal in all circumstances based on that. How about this? I'll make an agreement with the left. Let's outlaw all rape except for rape. Now are they happy? Of course not. Right? Of course not, because they're not really talking about rape. They're talking about how they want all abortions to be legal, and they're using a marginal example as the rule in order to make sure that abortion is legal across. You say that to them. If they say rape, you should say, listen, how about this? We'll make a deal. All the rapes, all of the pregnancies that do not spring from rape must be carried through to term. Now are you happy? They won't be happy, I promise you. And that's how you expose them. That's how you say, well, then it really isn't about the rape, is it? You're just using that as an excuse.